Submission. It's not the most exciting or inviting of words, is it? It suggests being overpowered in some sort of conflict, cowering before your opponent, forced against your will into submission. How could this be relevant to spiritual discipline, and how would it help to grow our love for God? Thankfully, biblical submission has nothing to do with fighting or being overpowered, and while the original Greek word was a military term, it was not used in the context of war, but in the structure of an army. Not long before the time of the New Testament, the tribes of Gaul joined together to rebel against Rome. In response to this, the Senate decided to send out a number of legions under the command of an up-and-coming general called Julius Caesar. Although the Gauls vastly outnumbered Caesar's army, the result was really a foregone conclusion, not simply because he was such an amazing tactician, but because of the difference in how the two sides organised their men. Organised, in fact, is not really a word that could apply to the Gauls, as their men all fought as individuals. There was no clear structure or even a suggestion of discipline, and the general battle plan was scream, wave your sword, and run at the enemy. The Roman army, however, had a very clear structure, and every soldier knew his place, so got in line and submitted to those above. As a result, the Roman military machine ploughed through Gaul and crushed the rebellion. Job done. Submission, then, was about knowing your place and getting in line below others. And as such, it was not something done to you, but something you did to yourself. In Christian terms, submission has the sense of getting in line among other believers, specifically taking the lowest place, voluntarily giving up our rights for the benefit of others, putting their interests and needs before our own. Such submission could hardly be equated with being weak, as the term suggests today, but true biblical submission takes great strength. It is hard to give up our rights for others when we're constantly being told by society that we have rights and we should exercise them. It is hard to put the interests and needs of others before our own, since the natural impulse is to look out for ourselves first. If you tried the 24-hour submission, spending an entire day submitting to everyone within reason, then you know this is true. Submission takes strength. It is not about being complacent or passive, not caring if people trample all over you and take advantage of you. True godly submission involves actively making decisions to get in line beneath others, providing for them, caring for them, and loving them. And while this may sound fine in theory, in practice, when we are faced with people in the church we do not get on with or maybe think of as being naturally lower than ourselves, it is difficult to even know where to begin. In Ephesians 5, Paul laid out 3 areas of submission: wives to husbands, children to parents, and slaves to masters. All normal relationships in a first century household. And while society today is very different, the household is still the prime training area to practice submission, putting those we live with before ourselves, looking out for them, caring for them, providing for them, and loving them. Not everyone, of course, can take advantage of this training ground, but don't despair. There are many other areas where you can practice this area of spiritual discipline. The workplace, for example, schools and colleges, clubs and societies, mixing with friends and families, and of course others in the local church. So what's the point behind practicing submission? If all we're doing is helping other people to have an easier life while we end up losing out, is it really worth it? It's certainly true that the focus of this area of spiritual discipline is our interaction with other people. But ultimately, as with all spiritual discipline, the aim is to grow our love for God. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus called his followers not to chase around after the things they wanted or needed, but to seek God's kingdom, his rule and reign in our lives first. It is to this end that we practice submission, because we're learning to recognize that he is God, that he is sovereign over all things. And that as we submit to others, putting their interests and needs before our own, we are ultimately submitting to God, trusting in His provision and protection rather than chasing after these things ourselves.